sexual services for money. It's not illegal to sell sex, but almost every activity associated with the trade, from brothel keeping to soliciting, is, which means that many women in the industry face the prospect of being charged. Many women and men within the industry face the prospect of being charged with an offence, and they often take risks to avoid working illegally. So might decriminalisation of the sex industry be the best way to protect people who sell sex? One activist and former sex worker, who goes by the name of Susie, although it's not her real name, thinks so. Earlier, we played a film that Susie made for you. Here's a short extract before we have a conversation about the issues.
Okay, my name's Susie. I have worked in the sex industry on and off in my adult life. There's a perception that sex work is inherently degrading, that it's morally wrong. But when you look at it compared to the other low-paid, long hours, incredibly physically demanding jobs, it's often the best choice for people.
According to one estimate, there are nearly 73,000 sex workers in the UK today, with 32,000 in London alone. There's no doubt that some of those people are coerced into selling sex. But to be clear, this film isn't about people who are coerced into prostitution against their will. It's about people who have made a decision to work in the sex industry and how the law often fails to protect those people.
I'm Maria. I'm from Portugal, and I'm a sex worker.
Maria, not her real name, says she was working with a group of women at a brothel in London when she became the victim of an armed robbery.
I was in a house working with a few different girls, and then 5 or 6 different guys just came inside of the house. The security opened the door for them, and then they just went with knives and they just stole all the money.
The police arrived soon after to investigate, but Maria explained that the police seemed to be as interested in the work going on at the premises as in the robbery itself. Maria explains that it's for precisely this reason that sex workers are often reluctant to report violent crime to the police for fear of being investigated themselves.
If they call the police will just see the place that they are working, and they will say today leave or something, and they can't just keep working there.
I'm originally from Romania. I'm a sex worker. I've been a sex worker for the last 5 years. I've been working in Soho ever since.
Suzanne, once again not her real name, has an even more shocking story. Sadly, some years ago she was the victim of a violent attack whilst at work.
The person just put his hands around my neck, and then he keep on pressing with one hand on my throat and keep on punching me into the face until I passed out. The person was there to kill me.
Fortunately, Suzanne was working with someone that night, her receptionist, who was eventually able to call for medical help. But she believes that had she been working alone, she might not have survived the attack.
If it wasn't for her at that night, no one could have woken me up.
The thing that sex workers want is full decriminalisation of sex work.
But as long as the law continues to act as an incentive to unsafe working practices, more sex workers, like the women we've heard from in this film, will be at risk of violence and abuse.
Well, let's talk now to Niki Adams from the English collective of Prostitutes, also to Thangham Debonair, who is a Labour MP who campaigns on these issues, and Kat Banyard, who is the founder of UK Feminista. Now, that is a UK feminist pressure group. Also, she's author of the book Pimp State. Welcome, all of you. Niki, do you accept that if you go into sex work, you know you are taking a risk with your safety?
I think the way the laws are organised at the moment, yes, you are, because there's a complete contradiction between how you would want to work in order to stay safe and the fact that you then risk arrest. And so you can't work together for premises, as the film so you know, well made the case, and you even working together on the street with other women, which is a much better way of doing it. And women actually go to a lot of effort to bring in all these kind of safety measures, like trying to work with a friend,
Yep.
somebody that takes down the registration number of a car you're getting into, all those kinds of things. Women work very hard to keep themselves safe, but that puts you in a very risky situation of being arrested and prosecuted.
Let me ask you both, what would be wrong with, for example, decriminalising brothel keeping so that women could work together and hopefully be better protected?
Well, prostitution is a form of sexual exploitation, and we see from countries where they have completely relaxed the laws, that is making brothel keeping and pimping legal, that all it does is expand the trade and magnify the harm. So in Germany, which did what was requested in this film, which is to
we don't want
decriminalise
that.
pimping.
No, we don't want legalisation, as in Germany. What we're saying is we want full decriminalisation.
Yeah, that means no laws whatsoever.
It means that you're
specifically
subject to
applied
the
the
same.
prostitution
Yeah,
trade,
but you're subject to the
which-
same laws as everyone else. There are laws
Yeah, so
against
let Kat
rape.
finish your point, and then you can
which
come
would enable what has happened in Germany, which is chains of so-called mega brothels, where dozens of women in the same building see hundreds of men. The trade is now estimated to be worth 14 billion euros a year in Germany,
Okay.
and they have a huge problem of human trafficking. And I think that's the key point. What that film fails to do is to give a fair and accurate picture of prostitution in the UK, which
That wasn't
is
the premise.
characterised.
That wasn't the premise, which we made clear in the film. To be
Sure.
fair, we have talked about the industry many times on this programme, and all the angles that are involved. Today, we were talking specifically about those women who were arguing for decriminalisation in order to better protect themselves. Do you accept, as a politician, as a British politician, that the way the laws are set out at the moment, it doesn't protect women who choose to go and be a sex worker?
I think even the use of the word choose is really problematic, because if we want to talk about the harms that prostitution causes, we need to think about who gets involved in prostitution, how they're prostituted, and what the consequences are.
But
we
you
also haven't
watched
talked about
the
punters.
film, and
I
there
watched
are
part of the film. I haven't seen the whole film.
Well, the women in that film
had been hurt, and there
by
is no
clients,
safe,
but had made their own choice to be a sex
I'm not sure
worker.
we know that. I'm
Yes,
really
we
not
do.
sure
They're
we
in
know
our
that.
organisation.
We don't know
We
that.
do. They're in our
I'm going to
organisation,
talk
and
about
those are
women
the
that
women
I know
that-
from prostitution who've been coerced, who've been forced, who've been trafficked. Recent Police Foundation research that took place in Bristol found that there were 65 brothels operating, and in those, organised crime was taking place in 3/4 of them. Women had been trafficked, coerced and forced. They were not safe, and legalising it doesn't make it safe. What I want to see is placing responsibility for the harm on the pimps and punters, the men who buy and the men who sell other women's bodies.
Okay,
Because
so-
there's
so-
no safe way to do this.
All right, Niki Adams, respond to this. Legalising or decriminalising, whichever word you prefer to use, does not make women safer.
But it does, because you saw from the film, those are two women in our organisation. We know that, their situation came out well in the film. And what we are saying is that if they decriminalise, you remove the criminal laws, you're still subject to the same laws of the land and the same laws that apply to other workers. And what you can then do is you can actually use the protections that other workers have in order to improve
Niki,
your working conditions.
But Nikki, health and safety in a normal job is not the same. So if I work in a bakery, my boss can say to me, "You need to bake that loaf of bread." And if I refuse to bake that loaf of bread, eventually my boss can sack me. If if I'm exploited as a prostitute, and someone says to me, "I'm going to pay to have sex with you," and I then change my mind for whatever reason, and they insist on having their commercial contract fulfilled, which legalising or decriminalising would do, then they are raping me, and I have no choice. That's not a job like any other.
It isn't.
It's
That isn't
not
how it works
a
in
job.
practice.
Yes,
At the
it
moment,
is.
we're fighting
Yes, it
against
is. I've
terrible
talked to
working.
many
No,
women
but you're
who've
talking
had
about
that
women that are
experience.
currently in. You have to ask women who are currently in sex work where there are bad
have.
working conditions and where there is exploitation
And when
and
you're
abuse.
on your
what
own-
do
Hang
you
on, let her
want?
finish.
What do you want? And the last thing that they would say is for their clients to
I
be
think it depends
criminalised,
who you talk to.
because that ends up in a crackdown on prostitution. In some
No,
ways,
let me bring in Kat again.
one
Final-
second.
make
Just
this
last
point.
point. I mean, the fact is that we're sitting here at this moment where 1 1/4 people in this country are destitute. People seeking asylum are living on £36 a week.
I know
and
that, Niki.
prostitution
Is not a
is one of
solution.
the
Prostitution
ways.
is not the solution
but it
to
is
that,
one of the
Niki.
ways that
It's
women
really
have
not.
found to survive.
It's
When you
Okay,
look
all
at
right,
a film
all right.
like
We're
Don't,
not-
Mine
so
and
you're
Your
talking
Back,
about
listen,
legalising
don't talk over each
exploitation.
other because people can't hear you. Kat.
Thangham's point about organised crime characterising the prostitution trade in the UK is key. The trafficking of women and girls into this country to be brutally exploited in the prostitution trade is worth at least £130 million annually.
But there are laws
we
against
have to tackle
trafficking.
that. And the key indispensable link in the human trafficking chain is sex buyers. It is their money that lines the pockets of pimps and traffickers. That is why our laws have to tackle that.
But you're
we need a
railroading.
new law that criminalises paying for sex, but completely decriminalises those who are
But you're
exploiting
railroading over the women in the
That's an
situation.
abolitionist
You're
approach
deciding,
to prostitution.
you're deciding,
Hang on. Don't
you're
all speak at the same
deciding
time.
what's best for women who are actually in the...
No,
I mean,
we're
you're-
listening.
Made
You're
that point.
railroading. You're
That's fine.
railroading
No,
over
I'm
what
not.
women say, what they want about
I'm
their
listening.
own situation.
You're listening to one group of women. I'm listening to another group of women who tell me about sexual exploitation, violence and rape that they've experienced
there's laws
and
against
continue to
that.
experience.
Why can't we press?
Legalising it.
Why
If you're
can't we
on
get
your
together
own,
and
if
press?
you're on your own in a room with a man who's paid for sex, having someone next door to call for help doesn't stop
It
him
does.
raping you.
The woman
no,
there,
it doesn't.
it
Nikki, have you ever
the
talked
woman
to a
there
woman
said
who's
that you're
experienced domestic violence?
That you're much safer.
You're not.
That you're much safer if you're able to work
No,
with
you have
other
a
people.
false picture of
I mean,
safety.
No, not at all. And in
Yes.
fact, when you come down to the harm of prostitution,
Nikki,
women make a decision to go into prostitution, weighing up all the other
And that
options.
doesn't make it
And
okay. It doesn't make it not sexual
means
exploitation.
That one of the ways that we could tackle the abuse and exploitation in prostitution is to actually make it easier for women to leave and to fight
agree
to
with you
improve
there.
their own working
Okay,
conditions.
I
And
don't-
that
There
is
we
the
agree.
best of the Labour Party.
There we
The Labour
agree.
Party, led by
Pause.
Corbyn and MacDonald, are really uncompromising against austerity, and
Okay.
that's really what's needed.
I'm against austerity too. That doesn't mean that I
right.
think sexual
But that has
exploitation
to
is
be
the
the
solution.
priority, because
Sexual
it's the way,
exploitation
it's
is
the
not
way
the
to-
solution
it's
to
the way to
austerity.
reduce
Don't talk over each other,
prostitution
please.
without railroading the women actually involved.
Cat Banyard.
actually,
I'm not
I know.
railroading anyone.
We cannot make sexual exploitation safe. What we can do
Yes.
is end the demand that drives the exploitation, and that will be critical to Theresa May achieving her drive of tackling modern-day slavery.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming on the programme. Thank you. Still to come before 11 o'clock, a report into whether social services failed a young girl who was murdered by her mother will be published